Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast, with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
and Maddie. Hey, hi, hello.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back to the podcast, Godcast.
Liturgical Shenanigans. Here we are. Hey, it's
still Advent.
It's still Advent.
Still Advent.
It's technically our first podcast of Advent.
That's true.
We are no longer in the Advent of Advent. We are in the Advent.
Wow. Advent being the season of waiting. And
But
so,
not today. What? We're not waiting for Advent anymore. It's here.
It's
I hit
true.
my microphone.
Here we are.
yeah, Advent has come.
And you're not waiting for us.
No.
This needs to end.
So today we want to talk a little bit about embodied practices, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had the chance to kind of work with the church in the area here. We were commissioned by Emmaus Church to work on embodied Advent practices for them in this Advent season as a part of their kind of broader year-long working on embodied practices and worship. And we were excited to be a part of that project. It's a great sort of Advent resource with a lot of liturgies that we wrote and a lot of practices that we were a part of, as well as some great Advent reflections. So you can find the link to that if you want to over on Emmaus's website, which you can find the link down in the doobly-doo.
Doobly-doo.
In other words, you can find it linked in the podcast episode description.
Ooh.
And we're also posting about it on our Instagram, and Emmaus Church is posting about it on their Instagram. So it's out there for you all to find if you want to find it, and we'll be sure to connect you with the resources there.
Does have some like material components, but nothing you shouldn't be able to track down.
You
Maybe
try to
even
keep
already
it.
in your home.
Yeah.
That's true.
But I thought maybe it'd be great, because right now we're coming up on Christmas, where we celebrate the Incarnation, and we're talking about embodied practices, but probably should like do the zoom out thing and be like, what
Yeah.
is embodied practice? What are we talking about?
What does it mean to be a body?
I'm always a body, aren't I? Do I have to practice? What does that mean?
Sometimes you're just a brain.
Interesting connection to the last episode about waiting and practicing waiting too. Like,
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of chat about, just like, I don't know, for me at least, a lot of my Advent practices can be kind of heady, whether that's prayers or reading a reflection or all the kind of various things that we do in Advent. Although, interestingly, I feel like Advent is a great inroad into this because, at least for me, the lighting of candles is always a part of Advent, which in its core as a ritual is a physical practice.
Sure.
And I think as Jackson gives examples, what do we mean by embodied practice? So a physical practice, you're actually using parts of your body to engage the thing. What else?
It's not just words. It engages any and all of your senses. So taste, sound, smell, touching, all of those things can be part of
Hearing
an embodied practice. That's
is the other one.
Yep.
Yeah, I think of them as being quite invitational, that more of me is brought into this. And so, yeah, a lot of the things that we do, I think particularly in our segment of Christian practice is very heady, if we pray, we close our eyes, let's shut out our senses. And when we do our study, it's very academic, or at least very, brain and discussion-y.
And embodied practices, we're still doing things like praying,
Sure.
Engaging scripture. I don't know, just what am I trying to say? Engaging scripture.
Words aren't necessarily
go.
absent
There we go.
from embodied practices.
It's just a
they
different
might
way to do
be,
it.
Yeah. But they don't have to be. We're not trying to throw all of that stuff out.
Yeah.
We're just trying to reintegrate a thing that we might forget about or not pay attention to as much in our worship and spiritual devotional practices.
Well, this is a theological issue, right? Because if we're talking about the way we think about mind, spirit, and body, there's definitely the take that's a little bit more, what's the word I want? That splits, like a dualism sort of thing between mind and body.
Yeah. Dualism.
Gnosticism.
Yeah, a bit of Gnosticism where the idea being that like the good part of us is the brain, is the maybe spirit, but this idea that our bodies are bad, and that's not biblical. We've talked in other episodes before about this kind of Hebrew concept of nephesh, this breathing body, this spirit-infused matter that we are.
The idea that they're not separate necessarily.
Right. Or that what makes us image of God is somehow this like breath of life in earth and dirt and really cool. And so when I think about embodied practices, it's what pieces of, or what can we bring into this practice to help us not just connect our brains to our faith, but invite our whole self, our whole nephesh into the worship experience.
And I think in many ways it can make worship both more accessible and maybe a little bit inaccessible depending on the person. There are really legitimate reasons why people deny their bodies. Sometimes it's a trauma response and people just don't feel ready to acknowledge their full selves. I guess that's actually the only reason I mean is a trauma response. What would other legitimate reasons be to deny your body?
I think like for neurodivergent folks who have a lot of sensory issues, becoming more present to some of their senses might be really painful. And
traumatizing, one might say.
That's true. But
literally physically painful.
Yeah, exactly. But still, there are also so many of us that are just asleep to our bodies.
And we need an invitation to become awake to it.
Yeah.
And I think too, particularly of, I want to say children, but childlike folks who maybe aren't people who feel like they want to be in their brain so much. Oftentimes church feels inaccessible because it's so, we need to think our way through this, and it's so many being spoken at. And it's important to have those invitations to speak back, to practice with, instead of just kind of be there and let church happen to you. I think COVID actually was not a positive experience, that's the wrong word, but it was an invitation to lean into embodied practices more, because we couldn't physically be at church for church to happen to us. We had to bring it to our homes, which means we had to be more creative in how we invite people to engage worship in an accessible way.
Well, then there's the other piece where this is somewhat of a pendulum swing too, right? Where Enlightenment Christianity has moved much more into the headspace. Whereas if you look at a culture and a time period where people are much less literate or educated, a lot of what Christian practice has been over the millennia is really, you come in, you pray in a certain way, there's incense, there's like the candles we talked about, there's singing, there's, communion. Oh my goodness, right? Like it's so embodied and sensory. We literally take in this and talk about it being the body of Christ that we are being joined to.
And the way that Christ shows up in his ministry, he engages people's bodies, their senses. Like so many working class folk, he uses these images. He doesn't just speak theology at them to explain a thing. He gives them, these parables that are scenes that they might be able to imagine in a more tangible way.
Or he takes mud and puts it on people's eyes so that they can see again. Jesus
Reaching out,
performing,
touching,
or like
miracles is
so
embodied.
often the way he connects with people is through a meal. Like there's like so much of Jesus's ministry is a physical ministry.
Also, Jesus is God in a body.
Right.
Whoa.
God is embodied in that
Meta.
I think too, sometimes when we use big words like embodied, that can make it feel little overwhelming for folks. So much of our even Christmas season traditions are embodied practices. We decorate a tree.
We bake cookies.
We eat cookies.
We go sing at people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And put on our coats and go out in the snow and like knock on people's doors.
But then we
and-
have a hot drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. We serve others.
You can smell the pine.
You
from
sit
your
on
house.
Santa's lap.
Okay. But true. Yes.
You pull the beard.
This is Phil attacking me, but he's not wrong. So you already likely are doing embodied practices in
Sure.
your own life. I think the invitation here is to intentionally engage the divine or whatever that means for you in these practices.
Yeah, to the kind of sacramental worldview of what you're already doing anyway. Just remembering that it is suffused with more big words. It's suffused with numinous presence.
Whoa! So we have sacramental, suffused, and numinous that we're going to unlock right now.
Yeah,
Should we start with
just
sacramental?
Leveled up.
I
to
don't know
that.
what numinous means.
Sure. So sacramental, the presence of God in everything, is a way to translate.
It's like ways God expresses or gives grace to humankind, right? Is sacrament, is making things sacred. And so the sacraments, where I have to think about like communion, where the bread and the juice or wine become means through which grace is experienced tangibly. And we often talk about sacramental life, this idea that a cup of coffee in the morning or the sound of crunching snow under your feet are these different ways that we might experience God's
Witness of
goodness and grace.
creation.
Yeah. Now you need to go for the rest of your words.
What were the other ones? I remember numinous.
We'll do that one because that's the one I don't know.
Numinous is like it's a little bit ephemeral to me to try
What?
to define.
What?
Dang it!
You've lost me.
It's a little bit hard to grasp, even for me who is using the word. But I experienced the word numinous used frequently within a lot of Celtic Christianity circles, a lot of thin space language around like light suffusing, light kind of filling spaces, and this kind of like thin space of the light of God and the light of Christ. And so numinous, this lighting up. Kind of like luminous, but more so the kind of for me it connects also a water imagery. So you're being filled with light as opposed to light just like lumining, shining. Numinous is like filled with light.
so that you can shine.
So that actually yes. So that like as you become aware of that light, you are also the stained glass window shining.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I
And-
am a light bearer.
Yeah.
Let
And
me
this is
bear
where
it.
it gets, because like if we go Yoda, and,
Sure,
and
let's
we're
go
doing,
Yoda.
luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. That is not an embodied view of the world. That's saying we are not bodies. And we're actually kind of pushing back on Yoda here.
Yeah, Yoda
And saying it's
was a little
both and. Luminous beings are we, alongside, within, and through this
Is-
crude matter.
Interesting, because Yoda in Hebrew means
To know.
intimately,
Yeah.
to touch,
Intimately.
have a good time with. But it's an embodied practice.
Yeah.
Yoda is an embodied practice.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So-
that was some nerd.
That was good.
Now that we've numinized everybody here, what do we want to talk about? That's the kind of the theological, philosophical background of what we mean when we're talking about embodied practices. How do we bring that into our lives or into our worship experiences? And why is it important?
You go.
I think what feels important to me about embodied practices specifically is the intentionality. So, like we talked about, we already do embodied practices every day. This is an invitation to really sit with the why and the what of what we are physically doing. So Advent is waiting for God to be with us, and then we experience God with us. God is with us. Are we noticing that God is here? Are we with God? Does that make sense?
No.
And this is an invitation to notice, to really thoughtfully and meaningfully engage, and hopefully to do so in community with others, either literally you're doing it with a group of people, or you're doing it in your own space with the understanding that there is a community of fellow believers joining you in this practice in different spaces.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to bring is the beat that embodied practice gives you to go out your door if you want to connect with other people. I think of the caroling example that someone shared before. But like some of the like a lot of embodied practice prompts you to do something in a communal way. Not all of them. There are certainly embodied practices that you can do solo, but the a prompt is to bring you into community with other people, and also to bring your sacramentalness into the broader community,
and to do something in community with creation.
Yes.
So even if you're in your own space, you are still engaging the candle. You're still engaging the scent. I think about sometimes walking in the snow and hearing the crunch beneath your feet can be a very sacramental practice. You are engaging with nature in that way.
And the gift of seeing your breath in the cold
Yes.
is like all of a sudden that which is not seen becomes seen.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is communal, and maybe redefining what we mean when we say communal, because it doesn't always have to be with other people. It's just it can be just as meaningfully a communal experience with the world.
So we went with like communion with one another, communion with creation, and the other one I would do is like across time space. For me,
God is a circle.
Sure. Well, and I think I talked about this last time with the idea of like Christmassy memories and such, connecting me to past me and to other whatever.
Yeah.
But let's say even if it's a daily practice or a weekly or whatever, if I've got a spot where I sit and I strike a match, you know, and that sound and that sight and that sulfur smell that comes up as I light the candle, it does feel like I've come back to this place, or I've joined this space. And so I think for me, a lot of embodied practice is that, like, once my body remembers this, my body knows this, and maybe it even knows that other people have done this thing, entered this holy space, this holy time space, and I'm there with them in that kind of communing sense.
And it's communing with yourself across time.
Parts of you.
Which is the same thing like with taking communion. I mean, it's rare that, you know, when I stand there or when I receive it, I'm connected to those memories of me doing it before, right? Like there's this, the words of institution being the same every time. It's this, you
can hear different voices saying those words, like the pastor from this church when you lived in this town growing up, or the pastor at the church you went to when you were in college, or like all of their voices come together in those same words.
Back to that time when Jesus was at a table saying those words.
Yeah.
And it's just, whew.
Well, it's an invitation to cyclical time, whatever.
Yeah.
Instead
Circuitous?
instead of this linear you just made that up, didn't you?
No.
Okay. Instead of this linear time that we've enforced upon ourselves.
Yeah.
If you look at Advent in the way the church visually puts not just Advent, but like all of the church year, it is a circle. So it's just kind of never ending.
We're talking about calendrical rites.
Always beginning. Yeah.
And the liturgical calendar.
There we go. When we think liturgically and liturgical season, like the season of Advent, we are engaging this circle of time, which means we're engaging past, present, and future communities all at the same time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because God is both past, present, future, which is beautiful.
Yep.
Think your way through that. You can't.
We should almost do an episode on time sometime, because
Yeah.
I
have
have
all
so
these.
many seminary papers I have written about just that.
Yeah. I have so many like spark thoughts off of that about how like God steps into time to interact with us, but God is not bound.
Leaving another time.
Yeah, God is not bound by time. Time is a creature that is created as well.
By creatures.
Yeah. So it's so there's also I love that idea that we are connected over and over and over again to the rhythm of it, and to God working in Advent after Advent after Advent, and it's that's a beautiful image.
Feels like we've hit some of the why. Is there more on the why?
I don't
Why
think
do
so.
this?
No.
So then, yeah, what's it look like?
Yeah, I was going to say, we spent a lot of time in the heady space of embodiment.
We talked about like crunching the snow beneath our feet,
Yeah.
the lighting
Should
of
we-
candles.
Give me more
striking
This should
the
be an
match.
ASMR episode.
Well, I did
Should-
think
the
about
crunching
that.
of the snow.
So,
Sorry,
one-
Jackson.
Can I actually? I'm gonna do. No, stop that, Phil.
Oh my
I do have one I want to
Miss
do. I have
Nophomia
one.
trigger warning.
No, give me one. Okay, so in this Advent devotional that we created, one of the practices we have is writing on seed paper and
Yeah.
planting it in dirt. And as part of this, we gave little jars of dirt to people. That's as loud as I can get it. But this
She
is
shook the jar of
I shook
dirt.
the jar of dirt.
You should have sung that. I've got a jar.
But even like it's so gentle. The sound. It's
Would
okay.
opening it make a popping sound?
Oh. Can you
can't-
smell the dirt? Imagine the smell
Imagine the smell
Oh
of
my God.
fresh
It's
turned
fair- it's-
earth.
of the
So-
humus.
But the act of planting something is a embodied practice, which I think engages all the senses: smell, touch,
Yep.
sound,
Not-
taste.
I am not going to taste the
Well,
dirt.
smelling some. I don't know. Sometimes
It's
when I
not the
smell
same.
earth, I can taste
It's
it.
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
same.
Fair, but it might feel tasty to you. What's the other sense? Sound, touch, smell, taste, sight. But like the physicality of also experiencing community with nature in that way, because you're taking creation and burying it inside of creation in order to make more creation happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or matter. You're taking matter and putting it inside more matter in order for whatever.
What other embodied practices show up in our lives? I have one example that's particular to Advent. So I think I talked about last time that Jackson and I start observing Advent early, following the Celtic Advent tradition of starting 40 days before Christmas. And what we've started doing is we bought an old-fashioned oil lamp. So a
Of course
big-
you did.
Yeah, I know. But now that practice is such an embodied practice for me. So we have a very, very short liturgy that we speak sort of back and forth. But the other pieces of it are we set everything in place so we know where everything is when we turn off all of the lights and we let it just be dark for a second. And then someone will strike a match and you can like we leave the silence so that match strike is really pops. And like someone said earlier, like you can really smell the sulfur and the smoke from that. And I can hear the sound of like the, I don't remember what the word is, but like the glass piece of the lantern, like coming out of the metal pieces that keep it in place. And then the sound of that knob turning that brings up the wick. And then the fire lighting it, and you can smell the oil starting to burn. And then all of those sounds in reverse, putting the glass back on, all of that. And then silence being such a huge part of that embodied practice too, because how often do we actually sit in silence these days? I hardly ever do. The closest I get is like bedtime, but like sleep usually happens pretty fast, so it's not like a lingering dwelling in silence. And then the final part I'll mention of that practice is like because it's flame and there's so much darkness around, you have like flickering of the light everywhere in a very unique way that doesn't necessarily happen in other pieces. So like because everything else is so quiet, both visually and sound-wise, it kind of lets you just hone in on all of these small tactile pieces of this embodied practice. And it's super simple. It's just lighting a lantern. But because it's given intentional time, it has become something so much more meaningful, because I also associate this sort of Advent waiting with all of those physical experiences now.
That's lovely. And you may not have meant it this way, but my brain went in a place when you said it has become such an embodied practice for me. I was thinking about how sometimes when we do practices like this, the first several times it actually can feel disembodied, quite heady and awkward. So
Because you have to think about every
you have
single
to think
step,
about it, and also it's new, and you might giggle through it, and also depending on who is present in your home with you. My spouse and I started doing candle Advent lighting using some of the liturgies that we wrote, and the first night we did it, we had a guest over, and we did it, but I was like, I'm not getting embodied in this with this person, so I'm going to make it a joke a little bit. And then the second night, it felt a little bit more natural, and I imagine the third night it will feel even more natural and more like I feel safe and comfortable to connect my body to the practice, because I know what to anticipate as we're doing it. So I'm also like, as we're talking about these things, it can be really easy to hear people who do this regularly in their life and feel judgment towards yourself that you're not, because it feels clunky and awkward. And I guess just know,
There's a reason it's called practices,
yes,
right?
it's going to feel clunky and awkward. If it doesn't for you, I'm impressed. I've never had it, not for the first few times, feel clunky and awkward. The point is, the more we engage the thing, the more meaning it creates for us, and the more natural part of our rhythms it becomes. And maybe that gets back to our whys, but it's okay that it starts in your head, because again, the head is not a bad thing. The head is also part of your body, but how do we
It's not the only
move
part.
it?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How do we move it past our head in the times that we continue with these practices?
Yeah. And just to sort of shatter the beautiful image I painted of all of that Advent stuff, the first couple times we do this is literally the only reason we ever light this lantern. So we have to remember how to use
a
it every
kerosene
single time.
lamp and-
Because, like, where does the wick go? And if it's too high, there's going to be smoke everywhere, and the flame's going to be way too high. But if it's too low, we're just going to put it out. And when do we need to replace the lamp oil? And there's just like the first couple times are like, oh my gosh, what's
Forgot to turn on the dishwasher. Got to go back downstairs
Oh,
in the
yeah.
dark.
yeah.
If you have kids, how quickly does this need to get done before their what is it called, attention span wears
Right.
thin? If you have pets, that's a whole other thing.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
we're
this
all
is-
people.
It's all
with
allowed to be
different-
messy, but that's part of why embodied practices are so beautiful. Is
Yes.
because it invites all of that messiness into that sacramental
Yeah.
space with us.
And God was born into mess to be with us. So messiness is good.
Well, and along with what you're saying around the guilt about not, I think that invitation word you're saying is really important, especially if you're doing this for yourself, you know? Well, maybe in any space, but consent matters. But the idea that, you know, if you're trying to enter an embodied practice because you're supposed to, I think it's very, very difficult. Just like any mindfulness practice, that doesn't mean, well, if I don't really feel exactly like it, I can't do it. That's not what I'm saying. But there's a difference between feeling like I have to do this thing, so I'm going to do it, or as opposed to this is a thing I value, and so even if I don't quite feel like it, I'm going to invest in it and lean into it and try to be present and see what that's like today or what I learn. I think about a few times, more than a few times, I've tried to turn dishwashing into this, you know, like what does it,
A valiant effort.
right? Well,
Yeah.
it's not always successful because I often bring with me to dishwashing some kind of resentment or some kind of tiredness or frustration or something. And what I'm trying to do is like, well, what if I take this time to like the feel of hot water and what it's like to notice the textures and sensations of stuff being cleaned and, you know, that sort of thing, and the sounds, and that's more of a mindfulness practice, but definitely leaning into the kind of sacramental and the beauty of like, wow, we have hot running water and, you know, all these things. But oof, that can be a tough one.
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, this is such BS. I'm just trying to numb these feelings about not wanting to do this.
Real. And so should have been doing it, and here I am.
And I think a lot of times when we do these practices, it can sound like the way you're talking about the lamp lighting and that. This is wholly beautiful, striking of the match. And I see that scene from Ninja Turtles. I'm doing all of the pop culture references today.
I
Sorry.
love that.
The first Ninja Turtles movie, where Splinter lights the match when Raph comes home.
Yes.
It's just this great sensory moment.
Yeah.
So
And like
good.
Splinter's little Muppet hand holding the burning match to light the candle.
That's lovely. Yeah.
And I think I get that picture in my head, and rarely is reality perfect like that. But that's what I think the messiness of embodied practice is the all of my messiness and all of my resentment and whatever is also invited into
And
conversation with appreciation and sensory experience, and maybe even finds a more balanced context for itself within me, that I am not just this puddle of resentment.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate this, and I can have things that I value that I don't quite live into all the time, and I'm moving, you know.
That's
It's a
lovely.
conversation, a dialogue, an invitation.
That's lovely.
It opens you up to engaging the world differently.
Yeah.
Well, friends, though we've invited you to engage time cyclical, that's not right. Circular? Whatever. In a circle.
Sickeningly.
We're still in a linear time, and the ever-present bat signal of the clock, that is Jackson, has informed me that our linear time with you is ending. But if you enjoyed this conversation and really don't want it to end, we are probably going to keep talking about it over on the after show, which you can find by becoming a patron. You can engage our after show for the mere price of $5 a month.
Nice.
Where can they do that, Jackson?
You can do that over on patreon.com/Wayfolk Arts. Again, this is a Wayfolk Arts podcast. But yeah, you can find us over there. A number of different tiers of patronship, depending on your listening to this. There's all sorts of things that you can find over there. So you can find us over there. You can find all sorts of links to all of our social medias and things like that. We're on the Facebooks. We're on the Instagrams. We're on the X. We're on Discord. Definitely check out the Discord, where we have a number of different conversations like around the podcast itself over there, and different sort of subcategories for things. I don't, Phil, what are the subcategories actually called? They're called servers? They're
Channels.
called channels.
Well, yeah.
That's cool.
The server is kind of the whole big thing, and then we have these individual like
It'd be-
channels to hang out on.
It's a great place. So, as a reminder, our embodied practices that we were commissioned by Emmaus Church to write, you can find on our Instagrams and Facebooks.
Yeah.
If you come on the Discord, you could tell us about how and if you engage them, and if they were perfect and magical, or if your cat ate a match. We really want to know what this was like for you, and if you have embodied practices that are part of your regular Advent or just life rhythms. Come tell us about them. Also, as a reminder, we will link this full devotional, which can be found on Emmaus Church's website, in our podcast episode. So be sure to check that out and check out Emmaus.
Otherwise, see you on the other side of Advent.
Oh, that's right.
Christmastide.
Last bit of important note. This is the last flagship
It is?
Liturgical Shenanigans podcast
the
before we
year.
take a break over the Christmas holiday.
Fun! Maddie didn't know that. I had so much more I needed to say.
There's so much more. Well, you can catch it in the after show. So other than the after show for the patrons, which will be next week, we will be catching you in the new year, 2024.
Looking forward to it.
My child will be one.
Another cycle, a new year.
And it
That
circles
was
around
the
again.
full spectrum
Of
pendulum.
emotions. All right, we love you.
See you soon.